Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who said every day, "Ah, if only we had a child." But they never had one. One day, as the queen was bathing, a frog crept out of the water onto the land and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year is out, you shall have a daughter." What the frog had said came true. The queen gave birth to a girl who was so beautiful that the king could not contain himself for joy and prepared a great feast. He invited not only his relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but also the wise women, hoping that they would be gracious and kind to the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but because he only had 12 golden plates for them to eat from, one of them had to be left out. The feast was celebrated with great splendor. When it was over, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the child. One gave virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on, with everything that one could wish for in the world. When 11 of them had given their blessings, the 13th wise woman suddenly appeared. She had not been invited, and she came in a rage, without greeting or looking at anyone. She cried out with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall, in her 15th year, prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying another word, she turned around and left the hall.
Everyone was horrified, but the 12th wise woman, who had not yet given her wish, stepped forward. She could not remove the curse, but she could soften it. She said, "She shall not die, but fall into 100 years' deep sleep." The king, wishing to protect his dear child from this misfortune, gave orders that all spindles in the entire kingdom should be burned. The princess grew up, and she was so beautiful, virtuous, kind, and intelligent that everyone who saw her could not help but love her. Now it happened that on the very day she turned 15, the king and queen were not at home, and the princess was left entirely alone in the castle.
She wandered about, looking at all the rooms and chambers, going wherever she pleased. At last, she came to an old tower. She climbed the narrow, winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was sticking in the lock, and when she turned it, the door sprang open. In a small room sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning flax. "Good day, old mother," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing there?" "I am spinning," replied the old woman, nodding her head.
"What is that thing that whirls around so merrily?" asked the princess, and she took the spindle to try spinning herself. But no sooner had she touched it than the curse was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger. In that very moment, she fell onto a bed that stood nearby and sank into a deep sleep. This sleep spread over the entire castle. The king and queen, who had just returned and entered the hall, began to fall asleep. The whole court fell asleep with them. The horses in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the doves on the roof, the flies on the wall, and even the fire crackling on the hearth grew still and fell asleep.
The roast in the kitchen stopped sizzling, and the cook, who was about to pull the scullery boy by the hair for some mischief, let him go, and both fell asleep. A hedge of thorns began to grow up around the castle, becoming thicker and thicker each year. It grew so high that it completely covered the castle, and nothing more could be seen of it, not even the flag on the roof. The legend of the beautiful sleeping princess called Briar Rose spread throughout the land. From time to time, princes came and tried to force their way through the thorn hedge into the castle. But they found it impossible, for the thorns held together as if they had hands, and the young men would get stuck in them and perish miserably. After many, many years, 100 years had passed. Another prince came to the country. He heard an old man tell about the thorn hedge and that a castle was supposed to stand behind it, in which a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose had been sleeping for 100 years, and with her the king, the queen, and the entire court. The old man also said that he had heard from his grandfather that many princes had come and tried to get through the thorn hedge, but none had succeeded, and they had all been caught and died a sad death. The young prince said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man tried to dissuade him, but the prince would not listen to his words. Now, as the 100 years were just completed, the day had come for Briar Rose to wake up again. When the prince approached the thorn hedge, it was no longer thorns, but all beautiful large flowers. They parted of their own accord, allowing him to pass through unharmed, and then closed again behind him like a wall. He entered the castle, and in the courtyard he saw the horses and the hounds sleeping. On the roof sat the doves with their heads tucked under their wings. When he went into the house, the flies were asleep on the walls. The cook was still holding the scullery boy, and the maid was sitting with the black hen she was plucking. He went further, and in the great hall he saw the entire court lying asleep. On the throne were the king and queen, also asleep. He walked on, and everywhere was so still that he could hear his own breathing. At last he came to the tower and climbed the winding stair, reaching the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. There she lay, so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off her. He bent down and gave her a kiss. As soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and woke up, looking at him kindly. She then stood up, and at that very moment the king and queen awoke, and all the court, and they looked at each other with wide eyes. The horses in the stable stood up and shook themselves. The hounds in the yard barked. The doves on the roof cooed. The flies on the wall crawled on again. The fire in the kitchen blazed up, cooked the meal. The roast began to sizzle again. The cook gave the scullery boy such a box on the ear that he cried out. The maid finished plucking the hen. And then the marriage of the prince and Briar Rose was celebrated with great splendor. And they lived happily ever after to the end of their days.